In this video, what we're going to discuss are Sanborn fire insurance maps and how you use them to help you understand local history. Now, what I want to start out by talking about is what a Sanborn map actually was, because these have been around for a while. And what the Sanborn Fire Insurance Company did was that it went to various cities across the United States. This is in the 1860s and even to the 20th century, and the Sanborn folks would block by block go through your city and determine how at risk your city was for basically catching on fire. The idea was that if we understand what the buildings are made of in a city, how things are connected, what the buildings are, what they contain within them, then the city itself and the people in the city will be able to better insure their possessions, their belongings. And the Sanborn Insurance Company kind of met that need to allow people to get insurance based upon the construction of the structures in their community. So that was the idea of the Sanborn map, again, back in the 1860s and moving forward. Cities caught on fire a lot back in the day, so this was kind of an important thing. But what's happened, though, is that the original purpose of the fire insurance maps have kind of fallen by the wayside. And now, what we use them for as historians, we use them as sources to explain and show how areas of cities, communities, blocks, even properties have changed over time, how they were used 150 years ago compared to how they were used 70 years ago, and how they were used even more recently. And so that's the idea of the Sanborn map. It can give us a block by block, building by building, property by property overview of how the built environment of a community has changed. What it shows us is that things do change over time. And it also shows us how communities adapt. Maybe at some point a piece of property started out as a farm, but as time went on and the city grew, suddenly that farmland with a barn on it became more valuable as property for someone to build a bank on or a hotel on. And so if we follow the Sanborn maps over time, we can see that development happen. And it also shows us too how cities evolve, how certain sections of cities can be maybe at one point residential, and maybe then at another point they can be industrial, where you have factories. And maybe again over time, those factories fade away, and that part of the city becomes a residential area where there are homes and apartments and no longer heavy industry. And so what we're seeing is the use of the built environment in the community time and time again. And it also shows us how technology changes cities as well. Because if you look through Sanborn maps, one of the things you'll notice if you go back far enough is that you'll see stables and blacksmith shops. And as you go through the various maps over the years, you'll see those stables and blacksmith shops disappear, and suddenly mechanic shops will open up for cars, and filling stations and garages and things like that. So you can see how a city transforms technology wise over time as well. So that's kind of the background of what a Sanborn fire insurance map was for now and how we use them now. Now, looking at how to actually use a map, what you have here in this first picture is first image is the first page of a Sanborn fire insurance book, and it shows essentially how the city is laid out. It shows a map of the city and how the insurance company has divided the city into different squares. Each square has a number, and each number represents a page in the book for the fire insurance company. So whenever you go to that page, like in this case, look at the top of the map, you see the number 36 in black in a yellow square. If you go to the 36th page of the book, you will see this series of blocks, this square, in much more detailed, zoomed in form on that page. I'll give you an example of that. If you look at the map of the larger Brunswick area, you'll notice one of the squares, if you can follow my cursor, this yellow square right here towards the heart of the city, square number 2, which corresponds to page number 2 in the book. So if we were actually looking at the book, we would go to the next page. There it is. And there'd be number 2 right there, square number 2. And this is what we were just looking at in the larger map on the first page of the book. And basically the area that we're looking at now covers F Street to Monk Street and Reynolds Street to Bay Street. So if you don't know how Brunswick is laid out, now would be a good time to kind of understand how the streets work in Brunswick, because that will help you knowing where things are in today's version of Brunswick will help you understand how things looked back then as well and where things were. But for the purposes of this example, the idea here is like, well, what do we see whenever we look at the zoomed in version on the second page? And we're seeing the different structures that are here on these various blocks in downtown Brunswick. Now, you'll note that things have different colors, and there's a map key on Sanborn maps that you can use to help you kind of differentiate the colors and to understand more of what the wording and terms that are being used, the numbers that are being used in the maps mean. Now, for our purposes and for a lot of historians, a lot of the numbers, a lot of the things are more engineering focused, more architectural focused, and not really relevant to what we want to know unless you're really studying the building itself. But the information contained on the map can be really informative in explaining and showing us what these buildings were meant for and how they were used in the city. Usually, whenever you look at one of these maps, you'll see that the colors pink and yellow dominate. And that's because the color pink represents, if you look at the key, it represents stone and brick, buildings made of stone and brick, while yellow normally represents wood or wood frame construction. So that, again, would have been very helpful for somebody who's worried about fire to know which buildings are stone and brick and which buildings are wood. And it helps us now understand the physical layout of our city blocks and our properties. So that's important to the story here. How these structures, what they were built with, is important, helping us understand what the city looks like 150 years ago. Now let's go a little bit deeper and zoom in even closer. And if you look again at the map we have up right now of this specific block or area of Brunswick downtown, we're going to zoom in to the lower left-hand corner, the area that covers Oglethorpe Street, Gloucester Street, Bay, and Monk. So we're going to go to the next slide. Wrong way. We're going to go to the next slide. And it might be a little bit disconcerting to see it like this, but what you're doing basically is zooming in even further. And the beautiful thing is that today, Sanborn maps are available online. So it's very easy to zoom in and out to get a more detailed view of the certain blocks and buildings that you want to look at. But for the sake of this presentation, for this example that I'm showing you guys, we're kind of clunkily zooming in to show you some of the more detail that you can see in a Sanborn map at the block level. So again, looking at this lower left section of your map on page 2, you'll begin to see that all of the buildings are are laid out. We can see what they kind of look like inside, how they're split, how they're divided, and we can also see what these buildings actually were. So if you look at the first row on the top left here, these 1, 2, 3, 4, we'll say split building 5 here, what we can see is that these buildings, the businesses that were in these buildings, one was for storage, one was a wholesale grocer. If you look at this building right here, the top left, and basically what a wholesale grocer would have done is be the place where you buy things in bulk, and then maybe you have your own shop and you go sell those things in your shop for a profit. You also have, looks like a cola bottling company, Chero Cola Bottling Company. It's kind of interesting. And then to the right of it, going down the street, you have a vulcanizing place. I'm not quite sure what that one is. Vulcanizing is whenever you turn something or you make something that's rubber, make it harder. And then next to that, you have an auto accessories store. So this is a 1920s map. Automobiles have been more and more popular. So we see, if you look through the maps prior, you'll see more and more automobile manufacturers and retail sellers developed during this time period. So anyway, you're getting the idea now of how these how each individual building is labeled to give you an idea of what sort of businesses, what sort of industry is taking place in on that block in that section. And what you can also see here, again, a lot of these numbers aren't really important to you right now because we're looking at the history of the area, not necessarily the engineering and the architecture. But you can see, again, if you look at the numbers that are listed on the outsides, 106, 108, 110, these are the addresses of these buildings, of these businesses. 106, which street is this? 106 Grant Street, I believe, 108 Grant Street, and so on. And also, another important number to look at right now for us is these larger numbers, usually twos There's one with a one right there, another one with a one, one, two, and so on. If you look at these larger numbers, what these are telling us are the number of stories of the building, the number of floors the building has. If you look to the right here in the woodwork and storage building, you have a two-story building, whereas the wagon shop to the right here has a one-story building. I'm sorry, the blacksmith. The blacksmith, we have a blacksmith and an auto accessories, two stores right next to each other, basically. Anyway, the wagon shop, the blacksmith, is a one-story building. So you get the idea of what kind of information, how you can get a physical view of this street by looking at these maps. You can see how tall the buildings are. You can see what they're selling inside the buildings, what the buildings are made of. In this case, mostly brick. Some yellow is wood. So you're getting an idea of the physical layout of how people in the past lived locally. So this is what you can do with these maps. There's much more you could do with the Sanborn fire insurance map, but for the purposes of this intro class to this topic, it's what we really want to look at more is what the buildings were, or rather the businesses in those buildings were, what the structures were made of, and what they kind of looked like, at least in terms of their size. That helps us out here.